I guess like so many people who have grown up going along to church, it's very easy to think that that has made you a Christian. And if you'd have asked me when I was about 12 or 13 years old if I was a Christian, I would probably have answered yes. I had grown up in Sunday school, I'd heard the Bible stories, I'd had it heard it read out in church. We'd been very much involved in our local church. My dad was the organist, treasurer. We kind of helped out setting up things, packing away things. It was what we did. And it wasn't until I was about 18 years old that I realised actually that wasn't enough, that there was more to being a Christian than just going along to church every week and understand or kind of hearing the Bible stories. I was invited to a youth weekend at a local church, and on the Sunday night the guy who was speaking, a guy called Peter Woodcock, was talking about a verse that's in Psalm 95, and it's a verse that says, "Today if you hear my voice, do not harden your heart." And it's relating back to the time when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, when they were kind of being rebellious towards God and they weren't listening to him and weren't listening to his instructions about what to do and how to live, kind of living in disobedience to him. And also that kind of "today if you hear my voice" is kind of pointing to the voice of a shepherd when he's calling his sheep and kind of responding to him. If you hear my voice. And he was relating it to kind of back in the day when I was 18, just a few months ago when I was 18, to how there's so much around us that can kind of vie for our attention and kind of block out us hearing God's voice when he's calling to us. He's always there. He doesn't go away anywhere, but there can be so much that's just kind of grabbing our attention from hearing him. And I guess today that's even worse, isn't it? Because we have our smartphones, we have our instant access to messages and emails and social media, that there's even more there to distract us from hearing God's voice, whether we're a Christian or not. But that night, back in the 1990s, I realised that there was more that I needed to kind of understand than I'd grown up going to church. And Pete used a particular illustration to kind of just highlight this a little bit more, of a football game where a little dog runs out onto the pitch, escapes from his owner and runs out onto the pitch and is running around kind of causing a bit of chaos, and the game can't continue while he's running around, and a player kind of calls him, and then another player calls him, and then another player calls him, and soon they're kind of all trying to get the dog to come to them, and then the crowds pick up this calling, and before you know it, the whole stadium is just filled with people calling to this little dog, and it doesn't know where to go, and it's just running around all over the place, kind of running right on the pitch. And then everything goes quiet, and one voice calls, and the dog stops, turns and runs straight towards that voice. And of course that voice is the voice of his owner, and the dog recognises it, and he immediately runs back into safety, and the game can continue on. And Pete was kind of relating this back to that, the attention that we have, but sometimes we have to stop in order to hear the voice of our Creator, the voice of our shepherd. And that night, that's what I realised. That's what I think deep within, there was this sudden sense of, I knew of God. I'd always heard about God. I'd grown up kind of believing that he existed. But actually, I'd never really understood that kind of whole personal calling to me, and that needed a response. And that night I made that response. I didn't understand straight away about sin, about repentance, about kind of everything else that was wrapped up in it. But I understood that I am his, and that he was calling for me, and I needed to make a response to that. I'm so glad I did. I'd love to say it's been easy ever since, but it hasn't, because there have been growing pains. But I'm so glad I made that decision. And that verse stands today, and so I call that out as a verse that still demands response today. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts.